Hello and welcome to the Speed Reading 101 podcast, episode 4. Today we're going to discuss how to read faster. I'm Paul Novak, the founder of irisreading.com, and I'm joined here by Joe Rodriguez, one of our instructors based out of Toronto. How's it going, Joe?
It's going well, Paul. How's it going with you?
Doing great. I'm broadcasting, by the way, from Chicago here. That's where Iris is based. And I also wanted to just make mention, Joe, we've been doing this podcast. This is episode 4 now. And yep. I think when we started, we were kind of wondering, how many podcasts can we actually do and come up? We almost felt like there's only so much you can say about the topic of speed reading. And I can tell you, I'm a little surprised that we made it to episode 4, but there's a lot to talk about. We actually talked before we started this recording, and there's a lot of other things that we want to talk about, and we've been getting some user feedback. And if you guys want to send us more questions that you have or any other things that you want us to discuss regarding speed reading, you can actually email us, or you can give us a call and leave a voicemail with your question. The email you could send it to is podcast@irisreading.com, and the phone number where you could leave a voicemail, let us know where you're from and what your question is. It's 315-313-4747. So, Joe, let's go ahead and get started talking about the simple topic of, well, maybe not so simple, but to a certain extent simple, how to read faster.
Mm-hmm. Because this is a speed reading podcast, and that's our main topic of cover.
We must talk about this.
We talk about it in every episode. So, but this time we're going to spend way more time talking about it in detail versus comprehension and retention.
Right. Lots of juicy details. And we will, not that comprehension and retention isn't important, we will discuss those things as well. And actually, we've touched on some of those things in previous episodes. For example, I think we did one, episode 2 was how to improve your retention. We'll go into more detail in future episodes on comprehension, on retention, but this one's going to be totally about speed, right?
Yeah, and to touch on what you said earlier about how much content could you possibly deliver on the topic of speed reading, I'll tell you something. Since we started doing these podcasts and I started writing on my blog, that's speedreadingzone.com, I just go on a whole thing with researching all the other information there is out there on topic of speed reading, as well as just mental development and all that kind of stuff. And there is a ton of information, and we could just keep doing podcasts on this because we're coming up with more and more breakthroughs based on our own experience that we can add to just keep building this whole topic of speed reading, because it's evolved so much since back in the days.
Yeah, and you know what? Another thing that I feel I've always been wildly fascinated with, well, I can't say always, because when I was 5 years old I wasn't fascinated with it, but neuroscience has been a very big interest of mine, and I've been reading a lot about it lately. And one of the great things about the last 10 years, you have these fMRI scans, which are functional magnetic resonance imaging. And what it basically does is it tracks the blood flow of where's blood going in your brain. And there's a lot of new studies that are coming out, because this is just recent research on what's happening in your brain while you're doing different tasks. And one of the things that we're most interested in is what's happening inside of your brain as you're reading. Where is the blood flowing? How are things reacting? What's happening, when you're going back to reread material, when you're going faster, when you're comprehending, when you're remembering. And it's just a lot of new, speed reading, it didn't come out last week. It's been around since I think the 60s. It's become popular starting around that time. But a lot has changed, and it hasn't evolved. And we're totally committed to staying on top of what the latest neuroscience is pushing out there. And Joe and myself were actively reading, pretty much on a daily basis. And We're going to bring you as much content as we can. So let's talk about, we've probably got a number of things to talk about with how to read faster. There's a number of tips that we could discuss in this podcast. Ultimately, it's a matter of someone implementing these things. So, Joe, you want to start off with one, or you want me to go?
I'll start off with the first one, the one you probably hear in all of our podcasts, and the one you hear in our workshops and most of the speed reading material, and that's using your finger.
Absolutely.
Okay, so or using a pen.
Something to guide your eyes, basically.
Yes,
right?
Guide your eyes. So the idea is to stare at the space above the pen or your finger as you are going through your pages, and this causes your eyes to move faster. It also helps prevent regression. That is going back and reading the same word. It also helps you focus in on what you're reading, because one of the big problems today with slow reading speeds is that we're not focused as well as we should be. So that's the first thing. So you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I want to talk about, you mentioned that it helps reduce regression. And for people that aren't already familiar, I know some of the listeners are, regression is basically rereading material. Every single one of us have done it. I know, sometimes you read a whole page, you look up and you're like, I have no clue what I just read. I got to read it again. And this habit of regression, the average person does it about 33% of the time. One of the things that we see is when someone's using their hand to read, they don't go back as much. And part of it has to do, like you said, Joe, you've got most people when they're using their hand or a pen to guide their eyes, they've got a little better focus. But the other way I feel using your hand or a pen to guide your eyes will help you reduce regression is by basically just telling you where you are on the line and in the paragraph. I know sometimes when I was back in college, I would read these long paragraphs, and sometimes I would just start staring at the paragraph. There were so many words. It's like you get lost in a blizzard of words, and you got to snap out of it, and you're like, wait, where was I? Or if you've ever read to the end of a line, and then you accidentally reread that same line, you won't do this as often if you're using your hand because you always know where you are. It's kind of like a good way to kind of track where you are.
It helps pull in the focus, right? Because our
Absolutely.
eyes fixate on moving objects. If I were to if me and you were sitting in a room, Paul, and talking, and someone were to throw a baseball towards you, your eyes would automatically fixate on it as a defense mechanism.
And I hope I would catch it instead of it hitting me in the face.
So, well, you're a speed reader, so you'd be able to see it a lot faster than most people, right?
We'll have to do a study on that to see if speed reading actually increases your ability, your reflex time. That'll be interesting to see.
That
we'll do it by throwing baseballs at people. How about that?
We have this this theme park in Canada, Canada's Wonderland, Toronto, and there's this game in there called Whack-A-Mole, and I win that game every time.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with Whack-A-Mole. And by the way, we have that game in the States too. By the way, the U.S. has it as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, Whack-A-Mole is a lot of fun. You win this game all the time?
I win it all the time. I used to go there back in the days, and they actually limit the amount of prizes you can win in a day over there. And I used to have a season's pass, and I used to win I used to go 2-3 times a week. This was back in the days, and used to win 3 prizes a day. So we'd have 9 prizes a week that you'd win, and we just give them away to friends and stuff. Wow. But the reason why I brought that up is I win this game because I've done a lot of exercises with improving my reflexes. One of the things that helped me with improving my reflexes is using Lumosity.
Oh, Lumosity. Right. You were telling me about this.
Yeah, Lumosity is this website where there's a bunch of games, and you can improve your memory, reflexes, all kinds of stuff. Just check it out. But yeah, so if you do have the ability to focus on fixate on a moving object, like the throwing the baseball example, we want to use that to our advantage and have our eyes fixate on the tip of our finger or tip of our pen, and pull in that focus, because the lack of focus is what's causing our speeds to go lower.
Right. Yeah, I mean, some people just read slowly because they have trouble, concentrating while they're reading. And it's funny because one of the big myths about reading, and actually I would say speed reading, is that some people believe that if I go more slowly, I'll actually understand the material better. And the simple truth is that when you go very, very slowly, sometimes that could actually make your comprehension worse, because you're basically allowing your brain to think about other things. Your brain's perfectly capable of going a lot faster and getting information at a very quick pace. But if you're going extremely slow, I feel like your brain's going to get a little bored, and it's going to start thinking of other things. So one of the things that we see when we test out students with these standardized reading tests, when you have a passage to read and questions to answer, a lot of times we'll notice that people that are reading faster, I would say about 80-90% of the time when we do the initial test, if someone's reading 300 words a minute and another person was reading 150 words a minute, the person with the faster speed, 90% of the time they have a better score on their standardized reading test. And there's a couple reasons for it. One, they're more likely to finish the test and answer all or most of the questions. And two, faster readers, sometimes they're reading faster because they have better focus. So a lot of it does, like you said, Joe, have to do with your ability to concentrate while you're reading.
Mm-hmm. So we want to do whatever we can to aid in shaving off that time that it takes you to read material, and using your finger or using your pen. Great way to start. What other tips have we got?
So tip number one, we're going to I'm going to try to number them out here because I think we're just going to go back and forth. And number one was using your hand or a pen, something to guide your eyes. Number two is getting used to seeing the words faster. So tip number two is purposely force yourself to read faster. Now, here's what I mean by this. You want to think of it as a way to practice. So you want to set aside a little bit of time per day where you say, you know what, I'm going to try and go through this material that I have to read, and I'm going to go through it at a speed that's maybe double the speed I would normally go at. Now, you can't expect to have perfect comprehension the first few times around because you're going at a speed that's 2 times faster. So you're doing this on purpose, and the idea behind going much faster than you would normally read as a way of practice is because you want to start forcing your eyes to get used to seeing words at a quick pace. So once you get used to seeing words at a quick pace, I like to kind of think of it like this. Let's say the average reading speed is about 200 words a minute. Let's say I told you, let's do a practice drill. I want you to do this chapter, and I want you for the next 15 minutes to go about 3 times faster than you normally read. So that's like 600 words a minute. If they go through it, they're probably not going to have much comprehension. But here's how I like to compare it to. Think about when you're driving on the highway. If you're going 60, 70, 80 miles an hour on the highway, how does it feel when you get off the highway? It feels, because you're on the highway, you're going much faster than you do on a normal street. When you get off the highway, it feels a lot more, you just feel like you're going much more slowly. And sometimes you're still going like pretty fast and you need to slow down, but you don't realize it. So a lot of us are familiar with this experience because I want you to think of it how it works with reading, because it's a pretty good analogy. When you're on the highway, if you go fast and then you get off the highway, if you got used to going fast, if you got used to going 80, 50 miles an hour doesn't feel that fast anymore. Now, what if you got used to seeing words at 800 words a minute? You might not have great comprehension, but later on, maybe 400, 500 words a minute, it's not going to feel as fast. And that's kind of like step one to kind of improving your reading speed. Now, that doesn't take into account the fact that you also have to work on getting better comprehension, and we'll talk about that later. But this is one way that we get people to start improving their speed, is by just telling them, you know what, let's try to purposely go faster than we would normally read. And here's how I like to think of it, Joe. And I mean, you've played a number of sports, and I have too. The way that you get better at anything, including a sport, is you have to push yourself out of your comfort zone, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So forcing yourself to go faster is a great way to start building up your reading speed. And actually, I would recommend, for those of you that are listening in, a good way to do that is actually take a book that you've already read. And I would recommend you take one that you really, really enjoyed, something that you would enjoy going back to. Now, the fact of the matter is, if you read this book before, you should be able to go through it faster this time around, right? So you'll probably be able to go through it faster and still get comprehension. But the good news is you're pushing yourself to see words at a quicker pace. And that's the whole idea behind speed reading. Can you push yourself outside of that comfort zone and get used to more rapid rates?
Mm-hmm. And another great tool that you could use if you don't want to do that particular exercise, you can use Accelerator.
Oh, right.
Use accelerator.com. That's ACCELAREADER.com. And that will allow you to paste text in that free program and read one word at a time, and you can increase the speed. So you can do this training where you can force yourself to, or train yourself to read a little faster.
Yeah, I would recommend for those of you that go to Accelerator, that application, maybe try out, you copy and paste some text into the application, and then you set up your reading speed. So most people read at 200 words a minute. I would recommend, if you're trying to force yourself to go a little faster, try doing it at 500 words a minute. See how much comprehension you get. After you do it for a little bit, say maybe 15 minutes of practice like this, now readjust and try to go, let's say you were used to going 200 words a minute, try 300 now. And you'll probably notice that 300 words a minute doesn't feel that bad anymore, because I got used to seeing words at 500 words a minute. And that Accelerator is a great way to simulate that, because it will, if you set your reading speed at 500 words a minute or 400 or whatever you want, it'll go exactly at that speed. It's a little more difficult when you're reading on a physical page, because it's not like we could actually set our set our mind to go at exactly a certain speed. Our reading speed kind of changes sometimes.
Yeah, and to prove that is I always try to push myself to read faster, and when I'm reading a book, sometimes I don't use my finger and pen. Actually, I don't use it a lot of the time, but I try to push my eyes to move faster, and then I notice my comprehension goes really low. That's because I'm trying to push myself way too fast, right? So when you use something like Accelerator, you can set the pace, and it's a lot easier.
Right, absolutely. So it is a balancing act because we talked about earlier, just because you're going very slow doesn't mean you're going to get comprehension. At the same time, you can't go too fast because then you won't get any comprehension, as a lot of us know. It is a bit of a balancing act, but the way that you're going to improve your speed is by forcing yourself out of that comfort zone and trying to go a little faster. Now, that's one way to do it. Another way to do it would be, let's say you read 200 words a minute. Let's say you're using the Accelerator application, and instead of trying to go much faster than you normally read, another way to try and practice would be, let's try to read a little faster. So let's say I was going 200 words a minute, and that's my normal reading speed, let's say. I would try to force myself to go 250. And then I might try practicing at 300, and then I might try practicing at 350. It's just like if you were, if you were a runner or if you were doing push-ups. Let's say you can only do, 20 push-ups, and you're trying to build yourself up all the way to 50. You might start off doing 20 push-ups one week, and then the next week you might try to do 25. And then guess what? The next week you're going to try to do 30. And you want to think of reading just like exercising. Reading's a skill. It's something you can improve, and that's how you would go about exercising if you want to think your eye muscles.
That push-up example is great because there's this website called 100pushups.com, and
Oh, really?
it's a matrix. The way it works is they give you you first test how many push-ups you can do, and then I think it's like 3 days a week or something like that. You do a certain amount of push-ups, and then over the course of the program, you will be able to get up to 100 push-ups. And I actually was using this program, and I got up to like 50 something push-ups, like high 50s.
Oh, nice.
But I started off with this program doing like 30 push-ups. So that just goes to show you that if you take a gradual approach to speed reading, instead of, I want to double my reading speed now, and you do the exercises and you do the things we're telling you to do, you will see an improvement with time because it's systemized. Right. A little bit of progress, a little bit of extra. It's like adding a little bit of extra weight or adding an extra push-up, adding like 2 or 3 extra push-ups in a workout. You train yourself, but you find that right spot, that training zone, right? And going back to example of running, I'm a runner also. If you try to do a 5-kilometer run, for example, and you run too fast, you're going to run out of steam, and you're not going to complete your 5 kilometers, and you're going to get discouraged. But if you go too slow, you won't get a good time. So you've got to find that right zone where you feel you're being challenged, and try to increase your time in small increments. So try to increase your reading speed in small increments. And like I said, Accelerator is the one. I can't stop talking highly enough about Accelerator, but I really feel it's the best way. In fact, when I do these workshops, at the end, all the techniques, all the strategies that I talk about, I tell them to use Accelerator to train on them.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, part of the reason why in Iris, we developed this application, Accelerator. It uses a technology called Rapid Serial Visual Presentation, and the acronym is RSVP. So Rapid Serial Visual Presentation is just a method of displaying text. It's basically, you copy and paste your text into this text box, and then you choose how many words do you want to see at a time. So maybe you want to see 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 words at a time. You set your speed, and the words start blinking on the page at the rate that you set. So they might go 2 words at a time, 300 words a minute. And then you might try 400 words a minute. So the reason why Joe talks highly of this application, and I love it too, is because we tend to do a ton of reading on the computer screen. How much, Joe, what would you say if you took the amount of reading that you do in like physical material, books and magazines and newspapers, versus the amount of material that you do online, percentage-wise, how much do you do online if you took like a typical week for yourself?
80 to 90% online, and I would even say that's probably around like 95%.
Interesting. Yeah.
Most.
I feel like, for me, I feel like 70 to 80% online. And I mean, everyone's different. I mean, some people, like if you're actively in college, you're probably doing maybe more reading in a physical book because you've got textbooks. Then again, there's a lot of college students that are reading textbooks just online now. So the Excel Reader is a great way. If you have a lot of reading to do on the screen, it's a great way to read online. And also because one of the things that people want to be aware of is most people read more slowly online, or I should say on the screen. And there's a number of reasons for it: the glare, the distractions, and things like that. But they also find comprehension is worse. But if you use an application like Excel Reader, it's an easier way to read through material faster than you normally would.
Yeah.
Next tip, I wanted to talk about. So we talked about two tips so far. We said one tip to reading faster is using your hand or a pen, something to guide your eyes. Tip number two is try to force yourself to go a little faster, push yourself outside of that comfort zone. And tip number three is trying to grab groups of words. So what I mean by this is there's this habit that's common among just about all readers, this habit of fixation. And most people fixate on a word-by-word basis when they're reading. The reason we do this is because when we first learned how to read, you had to do it. You had to look at a word and you had to kind of break it down phonetically and syllable by syllable, and then that was the word, and then you move on to the next one. Now, the nice thing is, for most people listening to this podcast, I mean, if you're 12 years and up, you've probably developed a fluency with your reading, and you don't spend a lot of time on a word. Like the word university, you don't look at it and break it down like university. You just look at university and you recognize pretty quickly that it's the word university, and you're on to the next word. So your eyes take a very, like a split second to look at that word, and then they look at the next one. But they're doing this, they're stopping and going on every word. And that's what most people are used to doing when they read. The problem with that habit of fixation is that it limits how fast you can go. Because if you're going word by word in this herky-jerky motion with your eyes, you really can't, you're not going to be able to go much faster. So one of the keys to reading faster is to learn how to grab groups of words with your eyes. Joe, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, taking in 2-3 words at a time is definitely needed to get to the next level of reading faster, and this one can be a little challenging in the starting, and it's a little, it's way different than traditional style of reading, so it does take a bit of practice. So what I suggest to you do as an exercise is try to take 2 words at a time for a full sentence, and just keep practicing that, and then try to go to 3, and then eventually you're going to get to the point where you vary the amount of words you take in per sentence. So you're not always going to take in 3-word chunks for an entire sentence. You might take in 2 and then 1 and then 3 words. And the amount of words you're going to take in is obviously going to be dependent on the size of the word.
Right.
So if it's 3 really big words and they're right beside each other, it's going to be a lot harder to take in that chunk.
Right. Now, a trained speed reader, what they would be able to do is to kind of intelligently group the words. And actually, a lot of us can do this just normally when we're reading. By intelligently grouping the words, I mean sometimes you're grabbing 2 words, but sometimes you're grabbing 3 or 4. And it's usually dependent on phrases and sometimes even punctuation. So, for example, when we have the word "and," we know that there's 2 parts to a sentence. There's one phrase here, one phrase there. Or if you have the word or the word but, or sometimes you have a comma. A trained speed reader would be able to take note of those things. Because we have peripheral vision, you can kind of anticipate what's coming next, and you can grab one phrase here, one phrase there. And you're perfectly capable of reading groups of words. I know some people, if you're new to this podcast and you're just learning about speed reading, you might feel a little skeptical, like, okay, how am I going to read groups of words? The simple truth is that you already do read groups of words. When you see, let's say you were driving and you saw a sign that said New York City, you wouldn't fixate on the word new and then York and then city. You would just fixate on a sign, and you would catch all 3 words, New York City, in one easy, it would be easy to read. The problem is if the words New York City were on a printed page, most people are going to stop on the word new and then York and then city, and that's what kind of slows people down.
Yeah, and the thing about this is as you're practicing this, try not to be too in your head about it, saying, I've got to do two and then two and then two. Just kind of relax. You do it sometimes when you read. You might not catch yourself doing it, but if you're conscious of it, that this is something that you need to do, you'll automatically start doing it, and it'll become more of a habit.
Right, and actually, to go back to Accelerator, the Accelerator is actually a useful way to practice grabbing groups of words too, for the simple fact that you can basically tell the application how many words do you want to see at a time. So if you're used to going one word at a time, like most readers are, just tell the application, you know what, I want to see 2 words at a time. And it'll blink 2 words at a time, and you'll notice right away that it's pretty simple to get 2 words at a time. It takes a little bit of practice, and then you'll be on to trying to get 3 words at a time.
Yeah. And also the type of material you read will determine your speed and
That's true, of course.
And level of words you're taking. Like if you're reading or chunk size of words you're taking, if you're reading heavy theoretical stuff or information that has mathematical calculations, you're going to read it maybe predominantly taking in 1 word at a time, or maybe 1 or 2 here and there, because it does aid in your comprehension if you fixate on a word. But the goal here is to strike a balance, increase the speed, and it'll sacrifice a little bit of comprehension, but with practice, that comprehension will go up. So
Right.
overall, you're going to read at higher speeds.
Right.
But when you're reading heavy theoretical material, it's going to be lower. So you're not going to push yourself to read faster to the extent of something like fiction, because you do need to comprehend and retain that information longer. And the reality is auditory reassurance and reading 1 word at a time and reading slower does help, right? Because it helps you think about what you're reading. It helps you form your own conclusions. So with practice, you'll find that overall your speed will increase for that kind of material. So the key is practice these techniques.
Right,
And practice
because
them
I
regular.
think what happens is initially when people start, and this is with everything, when people are learning something new, a lot of people get a little bit maybe frustrated at the beginning. When they're learning something new, things are a little tough, or they seem awkward. Or a lot of times when people are learning speed reading and they're training themselves, we start them off and we do these drills to help them, to force them to go a little faster than you normally would read. And people feel uncomfortable because initially they're like, well, I'm not getting all the comprehension that I'm used to getting. And the first step in the process isn't necessarily accomplishing all the ends. The first step is, let's get used to hand-eye coordination. Let's get used to seeing words faster. Don't worry, we're going to work on comprehension as well later on, but we're not going to try to do everything at once, because I know, Joe, because we talk about productivity all the time. When you multitask, sometimes multitasking makes you extremely inefficient.
Mm-hmm. Most of the time, I would say it makes you extremely inefficient.
Yep, I would argue the same thing. You're right. Single tasking, the human brain is really good at focusing on one thing at a time and doing it well. But once you have a few too many things going on, then we get a little bit done here, a little bit done there, a little bit done there, and then we feel like we got nothing done because we spread ourselves too thin.
Mm-hmm. And I got to give credit where credit is due. So Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek kind of opened up my mind to this.
Oh, right. Yeah. Great book.
And also information by Eben Pagan in his Wake Up Productive program, which I took. That helped me a lot. And also Peter Drucker. Information by Peter Drucker has led me to believe, or try out at least, the focusing on one bit at a time. Or one piece at a time till completion versus multitasking. And I find I get way more out of my day, and my days are way more productive, and just get a lot more done that way. And I actually also find that that skill is transferable. So when I'm reading, I'm focused in on reading. I have very good focus when it comes to reading. I've sat down and read books in its entirety. And the reason why I can do that is largely due to having a high level of focus.
Now, I would imagine, Joe, when you're reading books in their entirety in one sitting, you probably don't have your laptop open, and you've got Facebook on the screen, and you've got your phone on, and you're probably limiting some of your distractions to avoid getting distracted, right? I know that's something that I do if I'm trying to focus.
You've got to set yourself up you got to pick the right environment, right? So that's another tip that we can give. If you want to read faster, set your environment up properly and try to avoid distractions.
Right. That is another tip. So let's add that to number 4 right here. So we're talking about. I'm just kind of keeping track here because Joe and I, we went into this, and both of us have pretty much the same tips, and we were going to kind of pick them out at random. But I'm keeping track here. The first tip we talked about is using your hand to guide your eyes. The second tip is forcing yourself to go faster. The third tip is trying to grab groups of words. And the fourth tip is, you said, Joe, about focusing better, right? Like setting yourself up, limiting the distractions.
Yeah, setting your environment up properly. Like, we don't always get this luxury of setting it up in an ideal situation where the lights are perfect.
Right.
And we can shut off everything. But we do want to minimize distraction. The reality is, if you focus on reading specifically for a chunk of time, let's say 10 minutes, 20 minutes, or what I like to do, 50 minutes. Again, that's something I learned from Evan Pagan's Wake Up Productive program. If you focus for 50 minutes, a chunk on reading, you get really into it, and then you give yourself a little bit of extra time, not extra time. You give yourself that 10 minutes to do whatever, check emails or whatnot right after. You get more focused, and you don't have the distractions, and you comprehend, you retain better. So I do little things like just turn off the instant messengers, put my phone on silent. One of the things is I don't have Windows open, Facebook, and all these other things or Skype. I'll go into do not disturb mode because all that stuff helps.
Right. And sometimes, the fact that you're distracted isn't always your fault because sometimes it's someone else distracting you. So you can limit this, like Joe was talking about, by, again, turning off Skype, closing down some windows, turning off your phone. If you're really trying to focus heavily, I understand some people can't turn their phone off, but if you're really trying to be productive and you're serious about getting a lot of reading done, or maybe you're reading something really, really technical, then these are things that you absolutely have to do. You got to set yourself up for success.
Yeah.
Now, on a similar level, I want to talk about, because one of the things that I've noticed is I feel like during my entire life, I've always had trouble with focusing. And I feel like sometimes my mind is just racing, and this is sometimes great, and this is sometimes bad. Like if I'm trying to study for something and my mind is thinking about 10 other things, that can be bad. Now I want to talk about, with this topic of how to read faster as another tip, Joe was just talking about limiting distractions, and that was tip number 4. Tip number 5, what I'm proposing here, is to try and read in spurts. And here's what I mean by that. For those of you that might have trouble focusing on your material, don't think that you have to read for a whole hour. If you have a lot of reading to do, try to do it in spurts. And here's what I mean by that. Try to look for small successes instead of the big one. It's just like, in baseball, you might think of it as, instead of hitting home runs, you're trying to get a lot of hits. The way you read in spurts is you try to set up little goals. So let's say I've got this long chapter, and it's 50 pages long. It's a lot of technical material. But my goal is not right now to read the whole 50-page chapter. I have a very simple goal. I want to read the first section in that chapter. And that first section is just maybe a 2-page, I've got a heading, and it ends, there's another section with another heading, but I'm just trying to read those 2 pages, and that's like my first goal. So I read in that little bit of spurt. And then once I'm done with that, I think of that, once I'm done, like psychologically, I'm thinking, all right, I was successful in completing that first section. Let's get on to section 2. Section 2 might be 3 or 4 pages. And again, my goal it's like having micro goals instead of these macro goals of, I'm going to read a 50-page chapter. No, I'm trying to just accomplish it bit by bit. It's just like, if we could go back to the push-up example, if you can't do 100 push-ups, and I want you to do 100 push-ups, you're going to probably break them off into sets, right? If you can do 20 at a time, you'll just do 5 sets of 20. And that way you accomplish the 100 push-ups you were trying to do. Mm-hmm. And you can always build up. You could try to do 4 sets of 25. Or 3 sets of 33.33333. But the idea is that you break things up and you try to get those small successes. And I think that's another way to kind of set yourself up for success. And that's also, I think, psychologically very important. One of the things that I noticed with just books over the years is some of the more popular books, especially in fiction lately, have been books that have very, very short chapters. Think of like the Da Vinci Code, which sold millions, and other books that had. You'll notice a trend in the publishing industry where there's this trend to have. They're probably telling authors, try to keep your chapters short. Don't drag on, because people get bored if you get drag on. Isn't it true that if you have one of these books, and I know a lot of the Harry Potter books are like this too, where you've got these very, very short chapters, people fly through them, and part of it is the motivation. When you finish a chapter, don't you feel great?
Yeah.
Like you know that feeling, Joe. Like we've all
It's a
had it.
benchmark.
Like when we were in school, like you turn a page and you're like, I hope this is the last page, and then you see more text, and you're like,
Yeah.
great. And then you turn it again. Finally, when you see a page that's got a little bit of blank white space, you know you're at the end, and you feel great, right?
Yeah, and then you can build that with time, right? So if you can focus on one chapter and stick with it till completion, and take a little break and then go to another chapter. With time, you could do maybe 2 chapters and 3 chapters and 4 chapters. So when I do a full sit down and read a book in its entirety session, I don't actually go cover to cover in one long stretch. I read for 50 minutes, take a 10-minute break, and then read for 50 minutes and take a 10-minute break, and then take a 50-minute read and then a 20-minute break, and I just repeat that cycle until the book's done. And I get a washroom break in, I get some food in there, I get to stretch out a little bit, and there's a benchmark. I know. Right. I set a timer for 50 minutes, and I just focus on reading.
Right. So I guess tip number 5, because I was talking about reading in spurts, and Joe, you were along the same line. You're talking about breaks here, taking breaks, which is very important. Tip number 5 is going to be try to read and take those little breaks when you can. Read in small spurts. Maybe that means reading a section and then being done with it. Or maybe that means, like Joe was talking about, try to read for 10 minutes. Instead of, you probably have a bunch of material in front of you that you got to get through, and it might take you hours. But don't worry about the hours. Try to say, let me see if I could just get the 10 minutes done. And if I could get that done, I'm going to view that as a success. After the 10 minutes is over, I'm going to take a little break. And by the way, when Joe and I are talking about breaks, you don't read for 10 minutes and then take an hour-long break. We're talking about breaks that could be as little as 1 minute or 30 seconds. Really doesn't have to be long. I also want to introduce a concept here that I talk about in my classes, this concept of a mental checkpoint, which is very similar to taking a break. Here's what I do when I'm reading something very long that's broken up into sections, headings, and subheadings. I read and I finish. Once I'm done with that section, I stop for a moment to do this, what I call a mental checkpoint. And a mental checkpoint to me is to stop for a split second and think to myself, hello, are you still there? Now, the reason I do this is to see, am I still focused? I kind of ask myself this. And if the answer is yes, I proceed. If the answer is no, I didn't understand the thing I just read, then I should probably reread. But the reason why we do this is all of us have had this habit of going back to reread, this habit of what we call regression. Here's the thing about regression. When your brain starts wandering off while you're reading, you don't know when that actually happens. You have to actually catch yourself in the act of doing it. So eventually what happens is you're reading through stuff and you're going line by line, but you're not understanding a thing, and then finally you stop and you say, wait, I'm not understanding any of this. I need to go back. But do you know how long you've been wandering off for? Do you know how long your brain has just been out of the picture? You really don't. So here's how a mental checkpoint helps. If you finished a section, and that section was near the top of the page, and you stop for a mental checkpoint, and you think to yourself, okay, are you still there? Are you still focused? Good. Continue on. Now let's say I start reading that next paragraph, and now my brain wanders off. And a paragraph later, I actually catch myself, and I say, okay, I got to stop, I got to go back. Where do we have to go back to? Well, just to my last mental checkpoint. I don't have to go back 3 pages. I don't have to figure. So it's just a way to improve your efficiency while you're reading. Mm-hmm. So the big thing here is take breaks, right, Joe?
Yes.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and talk about tip number 7. And tip number 7, so far we've covered 6. And I want to recap them before we get to number 7. Tip number 1 was using your hand. Tip number 2 is force yourself to try to read a little faster. Tip number 3 was try to read groups of words. Tip number 4 was try to limit your distractions. Tip number 5 was try to read in spurts and take breaks. And actually we're on tip number 6 now that I think about it. I actually combined 5 and 6. Tip number 6 to me is try to get an idea of what your material is about. So maybe preview your material, get familiar with it. And one of the ways you can do this is maybe just scanning through your chapter and looking at headings and subheadings. Joe, do you want to talk more about this, the whole idea of previewing and kind of getting an idea what you're going to read, why this works?
Okay, so one of the things that I tell everyone to do is to read the first sentence of every paragraph of the article. And then you can also go ahead and read the first sentence and the first paragraph and the last paragraph of an article. And you can do variations with this with books you don't have to read the first and last paragraph of every chapter, but you could read the first sentence of the first few chapters or something. And the idea behind this is you want to get keywords, so it'll give you an idea of what the book is about or what the article is about. So then when you actually go and read the article, you'll be able to read it a lot faster because your brain knows what to look for, and it just makes the correlations. And it just helps with that. It makes it a faster read. So we do exercises in our workshops where we have students read the first sentence of every paragraph and the first and last paragraph, and then we read the article in a pace that I determine the pace. And what we find is the comprehension level is really high, and they're able to read at a really fast pace. And again, this is because the brain already knows what to look for when you go in and read the article in its entirety, because you take the time to aid that comprehension by getting keywords out of the article.
That's really interesting. And, the preview is so important because, to me, I kind of think of it this way. It's like traveling with a map. If you know what to expect, if you're like I'm here in the city of Chicago, I've lived here, I was born and raised here, and I know the city pretty well. Now, Toronto, where Joe is from, I'm not as familiar with it, so I definitely need a map. I'm going to have to go a little more slowly if I'm not familiar with the city when I'm walking around that city, right? And you want to think of your reading the same way. If you're familiar with the material, you're going to be able to read through it faster. Now, a lot of times I know the point of reading is to get familiar with unfamiliar material, but even if you have material that's unfamiliar to you initially, by just kind of scanning through the chapter, maybe looking at headings and subheadings, or like Joe was talking about reading the first sentence of a paragraph, that will help you get familiar with the material. And I think all of us know why we would shoot for the first sentence of a paragraph. Usually that's your main idea. That's your topic sentence. And I realize it's not always the topic sentence, but most of the time it is. Mm-hmm. So it's a useful way to approach the material.
Yeah, standard best practices for writing is you always put the introduction to the paragraph in the first sentence. So You're going to get a lot of information most of the time.
Right. It's basically, the first sentence is, here's the beef. Here's what I'm going to tell you about in this paragraph. And then the rest of the paragraph is just, and now I'm going to tell you about it. And then you've got a new paragraph, and it's the same thing. Here's what I'm going to tell you about in this paragraph, and now I'm going to tell you about it. And you want to kind of think of it that way, in that kind of a structure when you're reading.
Yeah, you know what? I recommend that you go out there and give it a shot. Grab an article, 5-10 paragraph article, read the first sentence of every paragraph, and read the first and last paragraph, and then read the article.
Right.
You'll be able to read it a lot faster.
Yeah, and speaking of this, while we were talking, I just had this thought. Joe and I were thinking of all these different. We've got a lot of ideas for podcasts that we're planning to do. I think one of the other ones I want to talk about at some point, we'll do a series of podcasts on how to read different types of material. So, for example, Joe and I recognize that some of these strategies are not always going to work on certain types of material because they're structured certain ways. Like the first sentence of a paragraph. What if you're reading philosophy, and the way philosophy is sometimes written is they don't give you the main idea up front. They wait. They basically drag on, and they kind of go logical point to next logical point, and then the main idea comes at the end. So we'll probably have a series of podcasts to deal with how to read maybe different types of material like philosophy, the sciences, history. I want to talk about how to read business magazines, maybe like The Economist or The Wall Street Journal. What are some ways that we could read those? The most efficient way to read The Wall Street Journal. What is it? I want to know. And we're definitely gonna be doing these podcasts. And by the way, if I could just mention again, for those of you that want to suggest podcasts to us, you can email us at podcast@irisreading.com and ask us a question or give us an idea for what you'd like us to talk about or cover. Or you could actually leave us a voicemail at 315-313-4747, and we'll get back to you, and we'll plan to actually cover these questions in a future podcast episode. I want to talk about, Joe, our final, unless there's any that I missed on your end, our final speed reading tip that I have here. And this is our 7th one. So the 7th one is try to set time limits. And here's what I mean by that. If you set a time limit for yourself, sometimes that helps your productivity. I want you to think back to when you had to write a paper in school. Let's say it was a 10-page paper, and it was due 3 weeks from now. Joe, when did you do this paper? Did you start on it right away? Probably not, right?
No, I usually wait till the last day.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the listeners out there are very similar. Fact of the matter is we procrastinate sometimes, or a lot of times. But the other thing is, I would make the argument, well, maybe you're not procrastinating. Maybe you just realize that, a 10-page paper, it doesn't take 3 weeks to do it, right? But it does take some focused time and effort. So you waited until the end, and I'm bringing up this idea of how time improves your productivity because I remember a specific case where I had this 8-page paper that was due at midnight on a particular day, and I completely forgot to do this paper until it was 10 o'clock at night, and I had 2 hours to write an 8-page paper. What happened in those 2 hours? All of a sudden, I turned off my phone. I shut down any other distracting things that would potentially distract me, and I started working on getting this paper done. I knew what I wanted to write about. I started going through it, had to do a little research, and somehow, because the paper had to be done at 12 midnight, and it had to be emailed to my professor, so the teacher would know through a timestamp if it came in at 12 or 12:01 a.m., they weren't going to accept it if it came after 12. So somehow this paper got done, and the funny thing about it was, this paper, I remember writing it, and it was actually pretty good. And the funny thing about it was the fact that I only had 2 hours to do it. Procrastination is not always good, but the fact that I had a time limit, I only have 2 hours to get this paper done, that forced me to focus. And that forced me to be productive and not waste any time. It forced me to eliminate distractions. And all I was focused on was writing a paper as quickly and as efficiently and as well as I possibly could. And I want you to think about how, because all of us have done this, we've been against deadlines. Sometimes I want you to set deadlines while you're reading material, because the fact of the matter is that you only have 24 hours in a day. Everybody does. How you use that time is very important. You don't have all day to read this chapter. A chapter that takes you 30 minutes, you could easily spend an hour or 2 hours on it if you really wanted to go slowly bit by bit. But we don't have forever to read our material, so if you can set up a time limit, let's say normally you read your chapters and it takes you about an hour. Let's say you've got really long chapters. Try doing it in 45 minutes. Get a timer and see if you can get it done. And actually, Joe, I want to bring up an interesting story that I remember from before I even got involved with speed reading. I've got a lot of brothers. I've got 5 brothers. Most of them are younger than me. And I had a younger brother who this was back when I was in high school. And he was in grade school, and he flew through this book really quickly, and I kind of didn't believe that he read it that fast. And I just asked him, I was like, are you sure you read it? And he was telling me what the book was about, and I'm like, so how did you get through it that fast? And again, keep in mind, this is before I got into speed reading. And I remember my brother telling me something really interesting. He said, well, I have my watch here, and I just try to make sure that I get through a page before 1 minute is up. So he was trying to go 1 minute a page. And he just had a little watch where, the dial was just moving, and when it got to 12, he had to be done with the page. And it was a way of he forced himself to go faster by setting that kind of a time limit, that kind of a deadline.
Yeah. By setting time limits, I mean, you're going to engage more focus. You've got the brain is a complex mechanism. And something that happens when you have a deadline and you have to meet a deadline is that you will pull in all those resources and you will put those resources into action to get that deadline, to meet that deadline. And like, there's a study out there that says that we're very capable of processing 600 words per minute, all of us. And I believe that, since we read on average most of us read on average about 200 words per minute, those additional resources are being used up by other thought processes that are going on due to lack of focus or just other thought processes in general. And when you have a deadline and say, I have to read this amount of information by this specific time, your brain automatically will start pulling in those resources and focus those resources in reading, and you'll be able to read a lot faster and comprehend better. So yes, setting a deadline and timeline, and an aggressive timeline, is a very important thing. And I was thinking about what you said about school projects, and even now just projects in general, because I do a lot of work in technology. Sometimes when a deadline is approaching, I get way more done. There's been times where I've gotten like 80% of the work done in the last 20% of the time. And there's actually a study that's out there about this, and a lot of projects get like 80% of the work is done during the last 20% of that time.
Right, it goes back to the whole 80-20 principle.
Yeah. So can you imagine that level of productivity, that level of focus that's required to do all that? I mean, we've had all this time to do it. For example, if a project takes 7 days, or 7 days you've got to read this book, and you read 80% of it, or do 80% of that project during the last few days. Just imagine if we could figure out a way to be productive on all those days, so we can get a lot of work done on all those days. And I think that's achieved by setting aggressive timelines, like you mentioned.
Right. And that's how we become more productive. And you want to think of reading as a way, you want to be productive with your reading, not just faster, not just better comprehension, but are you actually productive? So I want to wrap up here, Joe, and I want to just recap the 7 speed reading tips that we were talking about, and tips how to read faster. Number 1 was use your hand to guide your eyes. Very important. It's foundational to every speed reading program out there. Number 2 is force yourself. Try to go a little faster when you normally read. Try to force yourself as a way of practicing to see words faster. Number 3 was try to read groups of words. The Accelerator application is a great way to do that. Also, number 4, limit your distractions. Number 5 is make sure you take breaks or read in small spurts. Instead of trying to read for an hour, try to do maybe 5 minutes at a time or 10 minutes at a time. Number 6 was try to preview and get familiar with your material before you actually read it. And number 7 was set time limits, and set time limits and deadlines. Helps you become more productive. Mm-hmm. So anything else, Joe? I think we're kind of wrapping up here. Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, just before we go, I just want to mention that our class schedules, which is being taught in how many states now?
Well, we've got 21 cities in the U.S. and Canada, and we are expanding. But right now, we've really started to reach out to more and more cities, especially in the last year. And we also have an online class that has actually been very popular as of late.
Okay, so we've got these classes going in all these cities. There's probably one happening in your city or a city near you. You can check out irisreading.com for the entire class schedule. And here's a special promo code to save 25%. Enter speedreadingzone.com during checkout, and you can save 25% on your next class. And if you want to have a class taught by me, I teach them in Toronto. So if you're in Toronto, I will be teaching the next wave of classes that's up for the Toronto schedule.
And Joe's also going to be teaching some of the classes that we do in different cities in the United States very soon. So you'll probably see him in one of those cities. But you can always email us at support@irisreading.com if you want to find out where Joe is teaching or where I'm teaching. I'm based here in Chicago, but I teach classes kind of all over. And again, irisreading.com. And by the way, the promo code Joe mentioned, speedreadingzone.com, that's 25% off. Speedreadingzone.com is actually Joe's blog, and a lot of very helpful information. If you want to do a little more reading into speed reading and other topics related to it, go ahead and check out his blog. A lot of useful information there. And,
yeah, I've only had it up for about a month now, but I'm trying to get as much information, and I try to write regularly on there. One of the things that I've been working on is improving my writing skills, and that blog right there, I'm just putting a lot of good information on the topic of speed reading, and it's just going to keep growing. So I recommend you go and check out that blog and get even more information to supplement this podcast, and then also consider joining or taking one of our workshops, because we cover a lot of stuff. It's a 5-hour workshop. We cover a lot of topics, and we work on getting your speed, your comprehension, your retention better.
Great. Well, we want to thank you all for listening in. And we always tell our listeners, if you like this podcast, tell your friends about it. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it. Thanks for listening in.
Always end it that way.
Take care.
See ya.
Bye.